I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. That was the start of the speech I made in America a number of years ago. 5 years later, I was at another conference. I was standing in line to register, and a man came up to me and he went, I thank whatever gods may be. He had remembered that speech from 5 years previously. And he complimented me on the difference between my style of speaking and what he considered to be the typical British way of speaking. Now, so let's consider what the difference is in the speaking style between the two countries. You've all heard of Toastmasters International. It's an organization, Speakers Club, that was founded in America in 1924. They host the World Championship of Public Speaking every year. And every year, for decades, Britain and Ireland have been sending their joint champions to that contest. So how have they got on? So far, Ireland has had one world champion and Britain none. Not one world champion of public speaking has come from Britain, ever. The only person who came a close second was described as having a speaking style more like the Americans than the British. That person, of course, was me. So what is it about the UK style of speaking that doesn't win votes in America? And what is it about the American style of speaking that hits the jackpot? I think we need to remember that audiences as well as speakers are different in the two countries. And audience expectations may have a bearing on the content and the style of delivery. So I studied the speeches of luminaries on both sides of the pond. And I quickly came to realize that the key to effective speaking does not come from wise and wonderful words, nor does it depend on dynamic delivery. It comes from connection with the common man. And the most important quality to help you achieve that is passion. Passion comes from a deeply held conviction. It comes from a compulsion to right or wrong, to break down barriers, to transform traditional thinking. And passion will make the connection with the common man. The second most important quality is vision. See, audiences like to have a brighter view of the current situation and of the future. So, passion and vision, the two essential elements of leadership. So I asked myself, what exactly is the purpose of a speech? Is it about leadership? Is it about taking people from where they are to where you want them to be? What do you think? What do you think is the primary purpose of a speech or presentation? Anyone?
Persuasion.
Persuasion. Okay, well, that's good enough. Interestingly, whenever I ask that question in this country, somebody usually says it's to communicate information. And that gives you a clue to the kind of speeches that we normally hear in this country. They are informative rather than inspirational. Now, I believe that the primary purpose of a speech is to bring about change. Change in the thinking, attitude, or behavior of the audience. How many of you agree with that? That's good. Now, if Tony Robbins were here now, he'd say, raise your hand and say, I. And if that makes you feel uncomfortable, you've identified one of the primary differences in the audiences in the two countries. You see, Americans are more ready to participate in the event. Here, it's different. Have you ever been to a speech or presentation where the speaker said, turn to your neighbor and spend the next 30 seconds exchanging ideas? And did that make you groan? But the American audiences are prepared to do that. And so speakers over there can build in more interaction than is normal or common in this country. Well, see how it works in practice. I studied the speeches of business leaders and motivational speakers on both sides of the pond. I did a search on YouTube. Almost all the motivational speakers that came up were American. There were football coaches and baseball coaches and basketball coaches. And Al Pacino. All of them were powerful and passionate. So when I did a search for UK speakers, I got a rapper and some stuff about sound systems, loudspeakers. So when I narrowed my search to UK motivational speakers, I got David Brent. Yeah. Finally, I got a British speaker, and what did he talk about? He talked about leadership and passion. I came across a number of ex-athletes. They had energy, they had commitment, they had self-belief. And they needed that because they all had the same message. Not original, and therefore not passionate, not inspirational. So I went back to the American list and I found Les Brown. Now, Les Brown, I've been seeing and hearing Les Brown many times over the past 17 years. He tells the same stories over and over again in the same way, and I know them all by heart. And like most of his fans, I don't want him to tell them any differently. And I spoke to him about that at the NSA convention in Austin, Texas, and he agreed with me. He said, those are my signature stories, and like my signature, they have to remain the same. So, I also came across somebody called W. Mitchell, an amazing man who was confined to a wheelchair. A truck smashed into him when he was riding his motorbike in San Francisco, and in the petrol fire that followed, he lost his face. He'd no sooner recovered than he crashed a small airplane, broke his back, lost his fingers. That's why he's in a wheelchair. And the doctors replaced his fingers with his toes. Now, Mitchell has a number of signature stories about those experiences, and he chooses the moment to weave them into whatever speech he happens to be making at the time. But he's a storyteller, just like Les Brown. And in fact, I've encountered a lot of American speakers who tell quite detailed stories about relatively small little incidents. But they love telling stories, their own life experiences. In fact, their mottos could probably be, make a point, tell a story, make a point. Britons, on the other hand, tell second-hand stories. It's almost as though they find it hard to see the dramatic value in their own life experiences. So often they will tell you stories about other people's experiences. But if they do happen to have their own signature stories, when they repeat them, a British audience is liable to say, we've heard those stories before. That's another difference between the audiences in our two countries. Les Brown told me one more thing. He practices. Every story that he tells has been carefully rehearsed down to every tilt of his head, every pause, every change of inflection. Now, when I train business leaders in this country in speech making, they find it very hard to practice the same way. It seems to embarrass them. That's why maybe they come across as being less prepared and less committed than their American counterparts. Now, Seth Godin, maybe a name that you know, is very strong on commitment. He said, you need to care. You need to speak like you care. And you need to speak to others who care. He says, don't waste your time trying to address the masses in the middle. They're good at ignoring you. Talk to the people who want to see and hear that you care. I care. But a few years ago, I came second in an Anglo-Irish speech contest. And a Brit who was in the audience, who may even have been a judge, told a friend of mine that the reason I didn't win was because I wanted too much to win. I cared about my message, but she perceived that caring as self-interest. That same speech would have been well received in America. So I contacted a friend of mine in America who runs training courses in cross-cultural communication. And I asked her, what do you think is the difference in speaking styles between our two countries? And she said, well, for one thing, the Brits seem to be too concerned with beautiful language. Well, that's a lesson for speechwriters, isn't it? She said the Americans don't care about that. They want the message in everyday language. They want it plain and simple, and they want it now. Vanilla. She said some of her clients had come back from the UK feeling that they had been insulted at some point during their stay here, but they weren't sure when. See, the Brits are subtle and they're indirect. Americans are direct and upbeat. Now, we also differ in content. One speaker came back from the NSA convention saying she'd been energized, entertained, and emotionally stirred, but not changed. How do you feel about that? What do you feel? What do you expect of a speaker? Do you expect to be changed in some way? What do you think? What do you think?
You have to be a very superficial person if you're going to be changed by a speech.
Anybody else agree with that?
No.
What stops you from working it out for yourself and getting on with it? Why do you need to hear it from the speaker, not from yourself? Now, you're more likely to get answers to questions like that in Britain than in America, because you get better content in this country. See, Americans will tell you what you should do and why you should do it. The Brits will tell you how. But, and it's a big but, I find the Brits intrinsically negative. You see, the Americans celebrate success because it is in their culture to believe that the son of an African farmer could become president. But in Britain, the moment you're successful, they try to bring you down. It happened to Tony Blair, it's happening now to David Cameron. Perhaps that's why they hold themselves back from commitment in speeches and presentations. An American observer said that when a British businessman gives us a business presentation, they will tend to stand with their hands behind their backs. Now, you and I know that that's not true, is it? But it's certainly an impression that a lot of Americans have of the British way of speaking. And let's not forget that in the leadership debate before the last election, Nick Clegg won the first debate, didn't he, with one hand at this point. Another difference is vocal variety. The Brits will tend to sound less interesting than the Americans because they use fewer notes of the scale. In conversation, it's been measured the average Englishman uses 3 notes of the scale. From the platform, Americans use many more. Their energy, their passion makes their voices more exciting, more interesting. Energy and passion is not in the basic UK repertoire. So where are we in the comparison between the Brits and the Yanks? Well, in brief, I'd say that the Brits have it on content. More facts, better structure, superior language. It feels safer than emotion as well, because, you know, emotion embarrasses the Brits. But the Americans are ahead in the areas that really count, in passion, ideas, optimism, and persuasion. They recognize, they acknowledge, and they applaud emotion, because they know that emotion demonstrates the commitment of the speaker. And they also know that we buy on emotion and we justify with reason. If the purpose of the speech is to make change, as many of you agreed, that requires persuasion, as you said. And that involves how the audience feel about what they're hearing. They have got to want to change. They have got to feel good about it. That's an emotional response. So on that basis, the verdict goes to the Americans. Clear points of victory. But wait, can we do anything about that? Well, I believe we can. When we write speeches, whether it's for ourselves or for other people, do we write to be praised for the noble sentiments that we express? Do we write to be admired for our splendid turn of phrase? In short, do we write for applause or for action? And when you've worked out the answer to that, you will know where the power lies. It lies with us.